get to the Miami Dolphins. Their offseason in 60 seconds. Hired Anthony Weaver as their defensive coordinator. Signed Tua Tagovailoa to a 4-year, $212 million extension with $167 million guaranteed. Man, that goes a long way in Miami. Jalen Waddle, 3 years, $85 million, $76 million guaranteed. Tyreek Hill reworked his deal, 3 years, $90 million with some new guarantees there. Brought in Jordan Brooks, Aaron Brewer, Kendall Fuller, and Jonnu Smith in free agency, along with Jordan Poyer and Odell Beckham, a couple other smaller deals. Christian Wilkins, Robert Hunt, Andrew Van Ginkel, Brandon Jones, and Raekwon Davis all leave in free agency. 4 of those guys on pretty sizable deals. I mean, I think Van Ginkel was like $8 million a year, but they had a lot of guys who were sought out players on the market this year. Notable draft picks: drafted Chop Robinson in the first round, drafted offensive tackle Patrick Paul as a depth piece in the second round. Blue chip check-in for the Dolphins. How many did you have? Very curious about this.
They were a hard team. They're another one of those teams that have a lot of guys that are for sure in red chip, but maybe in blue chip. I for sure got there. Obviously, Tyreek Hill. I don't even have to explain that. Jalen Ramsey still, when he's healthy and on the field, still an awesome player. The next closest was Holland, and I wasn't all the way sure if I could get there, but he's a really, really good player.
I gave it to Holland, and I had 3 for them. I think 3 is fair. And I think they've got a lot of guys like right on that next line. Jalen Waddle absolutely is. Jalen Waddle's a really good player. I think Chubb and Phillips, when they're healthy, are both very good players. Teron Armstead, when he's on the field, is a very good player. And they've got a decent amount of solid guys. Like Zach Sealer is a solid player. Kendall Fuller is still good, even though he's getting a little bit older. David Long, I'm sure we'll talk about him 20 times over the course of this conversation. And they've got some interesting ascending pieces, right? Like Achan's, whatever he is, he's dangerous and he's fun. So looking at it and kind of taking in the roster holistically, I think I was actually more excited about the construction of this team, at least in the short term, than I thought I was going to be before I started digging into this exercise.
And this is why on the defense show, I said I kind of almost wanted to put them in, because how many of those guys did we just mention are on defense? Ramsey, Holland, Chubb, Phillips, David Long. Like, it could work out.
You were not wrong about this. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I'm kind of with you on that in terms of the ceiling potentially we could see from them on defense. What significant question marks does this roster have in your mind?
A lot of the offense outside of the handful of key players we know a ton about. Obviously, we know what we're going to get from Tua, and then there's, Tyreek Hill's incredible, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert are pretty cool. But the offensive line, man, it's not good. And I know that this is an offense that can kind of make up for it, right? Because of the way the quarterback plays, the way Mike McDaniel cooks stuff up. It's not a good unit, like, at all. And I think at a certain point, the bill is going to come due.
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we talk about what's keeping us up at night, because I think both of us probably have some concerns there. I would say the non-Hill, non-Waddle wide receivers apply to this. Like River Craycraft is hurt, and the fact that is notable feels like it's an issue. OBJ starts the season on the PUP list. Like Malik Washington feels like he's probably going to play a pretty big role for this team as a 6th-round pick. And the other thing I'd throw out is cornerback depth. The reason that I mentioned that is, do you know who the backup cornerbacks are for the Miami Dolphins? Can you name them?
No, I don't think I could, because I don't think Noah Igbenogany is still there.
He is not still there.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I'm staring at the Ourlads depth chart right now. The 2 guys on the second line on the outside cornerback spots. One guy's name is Storm Duck.
Amazing.
Storm first name, Duck last name. The other guy is Ethan Bonner. That's all. I got nothing for you in either one of those.
Yeah,
this is not like 3 or 4 spots down the depth chart. Like the 53 came out yesterday, and these are the guys on the second line of the depth chart. That may be wrong. We don't have a beat writer for the Dolphins, so I'm not as up to date on like the ins and outs of their depth as I might be for some other teams. But that is what I'm staring at right now on what is a pretty reputable source for how these teams are built.
That doesn't make me feel good. That doesn't make me feel good. I'll say that.
And I also think that age in the secondary is something to think about. Ramsey's going to be 30 this year. Kendall Fuller is 29, going to be 30 in February. Jordan Poyer is over 30. Marcus May is over 30. So this team, for the most part, I mean, that is not what you typically see with good teams in their secondary spots. For like these guys, when they get toward 30, especially a corner, it starts to get a little dicey. And so you've got a lot of those guys in this team's secondary. I think they can still be really good, but just something to keep in mind as you think about like the downside case scenarios for this group. What are you watching the first month of the season with the Miami Dolphins?
No, we mentioned the defense a little bit. I think there's a world where they could be really good. And to that end, what are we going to get from this pass rush? Chubb is obviously still on the PUP list right now, but Phillips has come back. Are we going to get something from Chop Robinson? Obviously, they spent a high pick on him. Emmanuel Agua is back. He's been good at certain points. He really wasn't a whole lot last year. And then on top of that, just on top of the guys you're going to get up front, um, this is an Anthony Weaver, their defensive coordinator. He comes from the Baltimore world, so they're obviously going to send a bunch of sim pressures and use the linebackers in the pass rush. But he's also a Romeo Cornell guy who was also very notorious for doing a lot of the crazy stuff like that up front. So I'm just very curious to see how much can we get out of this pass rush again when there's just a lot of questions off the edge, a new scheme, and then also you lose Christian Wilkins. Like there's just a ton of questions, and I think I'm just curious to see where we get by the end of the first month.
So obviously, with the Baltimore background, Baltimore DNA with this defense now with Anthony Weaver coming over, you had guys manufacturing pass rush over the last couple of years. Like Patrick Queen was one of the most important pressure players for the Ravens when they were humming. How do you feel like this linebacker group fits with that sort of mindset?
Perfect. They have two really good guys for this. Both in terms of just in terms of when they fire and when they're a part of the blitz, David Long, man, that guy is one of just the most absolutely violent little people we have in the NFL. That guy is just an absolute missile. I love watching him. There's a reason he's one of the most, not even just blitzed on like passing downs, but if you watch them last year on rundowns, they were blitzing him all the time, like over the center, just making him an immediate part of the run fit. That's just the type of player he is. So I think he's perfect for it. Jordan Brooks is a guy who also, when he's healthy and feeling good, has plenty of juice to go be that type of blitzer. He's also pretty good in coverage, and I think better than what they had last year. So if they want to do some of these blitzes and simulateds where you're asking guys to cover a lot of ground and you're asking them to pop off the line, Brooks is kind of a good player for that.
Yeah, and I'm very happy that Phillips is back. When there was a time that Phillips was not going to be back before the start of the season, or I just didn't know. I didn't know what his timeline was. Like when I was looking at him and Chubb both being hurt heading into the year, I was like, oh man, that's not a good place to start. And so the fact that now you have him, he's going to be in the fold. Calais Campbell is now here. They're probably going to blitz a decent amount from the second level. My hope is, can you piece it together until Chubb gets back, and then by the second half of the season, this feels like a unit to be reckoned with. That feels like the best case scenario. And I don't think that's off the table. I had my questions about that earlier in the summer, but that seems possible now.
I think it definitely seems possible. Again, if you can just, and I don't think this is crazy to ask, a defensive coordinator, let's give him 8 weeks to where he can really figure out what he wants to be. I mean, shoot, again, we did this. I've said this every time with Mike McDonald, but it took him a half a season to figure out how to be a good play caller. So if that's where we get with Anthony Weaver, I don't think it's a huge issue for the Dolphins.
What I'm watching the first month of the season is essentially what I'm watching the first month of every season with this team. What's the wrinkle? Like, what is the Dolphins' offensive wrinkle for the first 4 weeks? Because one of the coolest parts of the last 2 years has been seeing what they cook up in the summer. In 2022, it was all new. We had no idea what they were going to be, and they took the league by storm with some of the motions that they were using and some of the things that they were doing with Tyreek Hill. And then last year, it was all that cheap motion that teams weren't ready for and just changing number counts before the snap. And you combine that with just the 1,000 ways they were trying to run perimeter runs last year and how devastating those runs were because how many layers they had to it. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about opening the week one door with the NFL is seeing what the Dolphins are. There have been times, especially early on when they were working with Tua, where they would complete passes during training camp and he'd be like, no, that's wrong. Like that's the timing was wrong. The rhythm of that is wrong. Even if it's completion, that's not how we want to run it. And so they would work through things where they would be struggling to find completions on certain concepts because the timing was more important than the results. And the idea of training camp as a laboratory, when you think about this team specifically, it makes total sense. Like that's clearly how they use it because they come out with some like weird, like mad scientist concoction bullshit on the other side. And I'm really excited to see what this year's version of that looks like.
Mike McDaniel seems like the guy where he has perfectly found like where you want to be in terms of just throwing shit at the wall, but doing it with a clear purpose and having an idea in mind of what exactly this is supposed to look like. And if it goes wrong, okay, how do I actually tweak it instead of, kind of just blindly doing things? He very obviously, even if it looks insane, some of the ways that he's doing, and I'm sure it looks even more insane during training camp and all that before he actually irons out what's good. It just seems like he very obviously understands okay, we're going to try some stuff and this is how we're going to try to figure it out.
And I'm curious what this year's version is. Is it more downhill runs as a complement to some of the stuff that they were doing last
Can
year?
it be with this team?
We will chat about this in a second about what I'm worried about, but is it more downhill runs? They were 29th in the NFL last year, and the percentage of their runs that were gap scheme runs per SIS. So it feels like that could be something they lean into a little bit more because they were actually okay when they did them. Is it more 12 personnel? With Jonnu Smith there now, can you add somebody who has a little bit of juice, but also you can use him as a blocker? You can use him in some of these ways that you couldn't with your third receiver. They were 31st in the NFL in 12 personnel usage last year. So those are just a couple areas where it's like, okay, instead of just turning up the dial on what we do well, which they always do, what are some of the potential complements you can start trotting out there? And, we'll see. But what this team does over the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season is always, to me, one of the most interesting parts of the year starting. What is keeping you up at night with this year's Dolphins team?
My tone has kind of already sold it every time we've even sort of broached the topic, but this offensive line, dude, it's just not good. And again, I know this is an offense where they can kind of work around it, especially during the regular season. Tua's
Yeah,
going
they
to get
can
the
work
ball
around it
out.
against the Giants in week 5.
Exactly. That's the thing. Against these easier teams, it's easy. You can go put up 70 points on last year's bad Broncos or whatever. Like you can do stuff like that. It's just a matter of this is a team that should be wanting to get deep into the playoffs. They certainly have the high end talent to do it. I just think with this offensive line, it's really hard to imagine that world because one, I think when they have to like truly pass protect longer than a second and a half with Tua Tagovailoa, they don't do a good job up front protecting. And then also Tua to me has always been a guy who struggled when the pocket gets money on him and maybe he has to go create and all that stuff. And I know he has lost some weight, so maybe he can play outside the pocket a little bit better. But that to me is I would like
It
to
feels
see it
like
first.
off-season cope.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what that feels like. Skinny
Exactly.
Tua creating. I'm not buying into that. I think we're gonna have to find some other solutions here.
Yeah, that's one I'll have to see it for 2 months before I believe that. And then the other point is, kind of like I hinted at with the run game. I'm not sure this can be a team that can really run downhill because last year they were 28th in third down conversion rate running the ball, which is obviously not very good. And those are obviously situations where tough yards, bigger boxes, it's going to be harder to run the ball. And then they were also on 21.7% of their rushes. They either got zero or lost yardage. That was the 7th highest rate in the league. So for as many explosives as they had, there were also a lot of places where they were just dead in the water or ending up in
Yeah.
second and 12. And that's a bad spot to be. So I just wonder with how tough their defensive schedule is this year, could this be like a major, major problem when we get a month and a half, 2 months into the season?
Mine is kind of an extension of that. It's just kind of like this sinking feeling that they won't have the guys to fully maximize the counter punches they need later in the season. So the quarterback is part of this, right? Like I have concerns about the quarterback's ability to play right-handed when a team asks him to play right-handed. Can you do things you don't want to do? And I just think he has limitations that make that difficult, whether it's pushing the ball outside of the numbers or not be having to hang on to the ball and create a little bit. Like his window of success is very narrow compared to a lot of the other guys that we talk about. His skill set contributes to what this offense is. How quickly he gets rid of the ball allows this team to be who it wants to be. But what are you when you can't be what you want to be, when you have to be what a team forces you into? And that is my biggest concern here. And it extends to other areas of the roster. Like the offensive line, they doubled down in what they wanted to be. They got smaller at all of these positions. Aaron Brewer comes in for Connor Williams. You're smaller at center. You lose Robert Hunt, who's like your biggest mauling interior presence. Second, you get Patrick Paul, who's a good contingency plan. So hopefully that protects you a little bit. But you look at this team and you think about having to run downhill in December and January when you're having to play against Chris Jones and Justin Madubuike and the Jets linebackers in the most important games of the season. Do we feel good about their ability to do that as currently constructed? I don't think so.
No, I felt bad about it last year. And then, like you said, they only got faster and smaller and thinner along the offensive line. And this is like Mike McDaniel going gamer brain where he's just fully min-maxing on like what his build is. He's like, screw strength. We don't need any of that. We don't need size. We're just going to be the fastest guys that we can get. And you just have to feel like at a certain point, you're just going to run into a team that is built to stop you.
I mean, they did it last year when they had to play against the Chiefs in the playoffs. That being said, of any team in the league doing it this way, where they're just leaning into what they do well and just cranking it up even more, I do have faith in their ability to find some cool shit through that avenue. Like how well they just pry open the middle of the field over and over and over again, even though teams know that's where they want to throw the ball. It's remarkable. So I do think even with some of these constraints, we're going to see some creative potential solutions early in the season. The question just becomes how long can they carry that through as they have to play against better teams later in the year?
It's the same question with the Dolphins. What does it look like in December? We'll see.
That's it. So, and that's what's keeping me up at night is I don't know how different it's going to look during the most important games of the year. What are you most excited about watching with this Dolphins team?
All right, not to be a meme of myself, but dude, these linebackers. This is a really cool linebacker unit. David Long, I already kind of went on my soapbox with him. He is just a violent player. He's a very fast player, and he's like I said, kind of unique in the way that you can use him as a blitzer, like between the tackles, whether you're run blitzing him, like getting him over a center and just doing that like build a bear front type of thing where you can make him the nose. I mean, just he's a very unique player in terms of moving downhill. And then Jordan Brooks, I think, is a better coverage player than they've had at that position in a long time. And I know if you just scroll on Twitter highlights and stuff, there will be maybe one play a game where Brooks just gets absolutely cooked and gets his head spun around. But it's because they are consistently asking him to do the hardest things on the field and like cover a ton of space in the hook area and actually run with guys up the seam and stuff. And when you're not Fred Warner or Roquan Smith, it's hard to be
Or
perfect in that
prime
role.
Bobby Wagner, which probably
Right.
poisoned Pete Carroll's brain.
Exactly. So when you're not quite to that level, you're going to have these moments where it looks bad, but the 8 out of 10 times where he actually does it well and you just don't even notice him, that's what I think is more valuable. And I think they're going to get that from him.
I'm excited for you. You seem
Thank you.
very, very pumped up about this group. I'm looking forward to you getting to watch the linebacker play in the AFC East this year. With this team, the Jets and the Patriots, like you're set up for a pretty good year. We won't talk about the Bills. Mine is I just kind of alluded to it, the fact that like this team continues to double down in what they do well. I don't know if it's sound to do that with the speed over and over and over again, the way they have the last couple off seasons, but that doesn't mean it's not fun. Like trotting out Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert. Jonnu Smith ran a 4.62 at 250 at the combine. And he's not like 36 years old. He just turned 29. So you have all those guys on the field who have this amount of juice and can potentially do something with the ball in their hands and the way that they kind of stretch defenses and just attack space. I do think it's going to be really exciting. I don't know how long it lasts, and I don't know what the shelf life on it might be, but I do think at least early in the year, it is going to be really fun to watch all of these guys and the ways that they're deployed and the way that they attack people.
It is kind of funny how firmly they've committed to the bit. Like I do respect it that they've just fully leaned into it. Even Malik Washington is a guy who has a ton of juice in the underneath area. Like this is what they are, man. They're going to commit to it.
They were giving handoffs and like end arounds to Jonnu Smith in the preseason, which is like, okay, that sounds good. One more guy who can do something with the ball in his hands. I'm okay with that. I think when they drafted Jalen Wright in the 4th round, that was the point of no return. Like that was the
Yeah.
moment where it's like the fact that we're doing this instead of trying to draft an interior offensive lineman, this is all you need to know about our intentions.
That pick to me was the most how you know McDaniel is a Shanahan guy because those guys love just burning a 3rd or 4th round pick on just like a very niche, like specific type of running back player that they think is going to change their system or whatever. They
Oh,
just
running
love
back
doing that.
player, but I was also thinking about like Danny Gray. Like there's a
Oh God,
million
yes.
Danny Grays that have like littered the years of Kyle Shanahan drafting because of what he's after.
I'm thinking of like Trey Sermon and the Utah running back that they took that I don't even remember his name because he like never played. There's always one.
They come from the same place. I think Mike McDaniel comes by it honestly at the very least. The most important supporting character in your mind for this year's Dolphins team is
I don't know how he's still doing it at this age, but Calais Campbell is a pretty important player for this team. He is effectively their Christian Wilkins replacement. And, you know, I said on the NFC South show, he was one of Atlanta's 2 top pressure getters. That was kind of a product of them just being a bad pass rush unit, and he played okay. But I think it's a lot different now that he's stepping into a role where he has to replace a very obviously like Pro Bowl blue chip kind of player. So if he can get something close to that, I think it would go a really, really long way for this defense.
I want to say it was 2019 or so. I was writing a story and I had reported it out about Calais Campbell. I never actually wrote it because the Jags were just really bad. And I was talking to him in 2019 about the routine that he needed to follow to like get himself ready to play each week. And it involved like 3 rounds of acupuncture and like all these different things. That was 5 years ago that's what he was having to do to like get himself to that place. And I think he was talking to like Yannick Ngakoue and other like young group guys that were there about, this is what I have to do. And this is my routine. That's when he was 32. Now he's 37. He turns 38 this week, and he's still playing at a relatively high level. The guy is a miracle. Like, it's so funny that this is now 5 years ago where I was talking to him about like his legacy and like the end of his career. And he's not only still kicking, but he's an important piece on a really good team.
The league always has a couple of these just veteran strongman, like unkillable defensive linemen. It's like Cam Hayward is kind of in there, Calais Campbell. Like there's just always a couple of these guys that they somehow stick around forever doing what they do.
We already talked about the offensive line in terms of supporting pieces for me. I'm going to go a little bit of a curveball here. How about just Anthony Weaver? Right? I mean, we haven't talked about many coaches in these spots, but we've discussed this. They have some cool pieces on defense. And how does this all come together with the guy who is in his second stint as a defensive coordinator, but really is a green guy in this role specifically. So if he can be a plus, like added positive for them in that role, then I think this defense does have a chance to be pretty good. And you combine that with an offense that, for all of its shortcomings and vulnerabilities in some of these ways, is still probably going to be a top 5-ish unit. And the Dolphins get pretty interesting pretty fast.
And there's a lot of new pieces that he's got to like put together. Obviously, this wasn't his defense last year, but Calais Campbell is new. Jordan Brooks is new. You're bringing in Chop Robinson, some of the safeties. Like there's just a lot of new with this. So he's got a lot to piece together pretty quickly.
What counts as a successful season in your mind for the Miami Dolphins?
You've got to keep being a top 5, top 6 offense. I mean, that's what this whole thing is built out of. So you've got to sustain that. And then I would say at least get to the divisional round. And I know with some of their high end pieces, maybe that feels like stalling out, but I can't convince myself yet until I see it that they're that much better than that. But at least get to the divisional, man. Like win a playoff game, do something important.
Win a playoff game.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated. Win a playoff game. Like carry over some of this excitement into January. If they can do that, then I feel like this is a success. Even if they stall out, even if they don't take this thing all the way. And that becomes more of a concern when you look at the age of some of the guys on this roster. But even an incremental step toward that end game, that feels like a success for me with this Dolphins team.